Mac McLennan with us, President and CEO of Minnkota Power Cooperative, a utility, but also the Energizer Bunnies and trying to innovate for the future with something called Project Tundra. Mac, what's your top takeaway from the Powering AI Summit here?
Yeah, number one, we need a lot more power, a lot faster than I think anybody has ever anticipated. So you think about the number of megawatts or gigawatts that people are talking about here, and then the speed at which historically we've been able to put infrastructure in. It puts a phenomenal amount of pressure on how do you get all this stuff done. I mean, even if you look at kind of what the administration has done here to say, hey, look, we're going to find ways to roll back regulatory, we're going to speed up permitting, we're going to find all of those things. It is a phenomenal amount of infrastructure that in today's world is highly expensive, right? If I look at just the sheer volume of dollars necessary to kind of build out this, that by itself is a monumental task, which is where does all the capital come to execute on everything that's been talked about here today. And it's fascinating, I would say, to see kind of people begin to come together and talk about what does it actually take to get this accomplished.
All of the funders, the investors and something like that are obviously watching the same things you are, and you've got kind of a life cycle here and a learning curve of how to get there because Project Tundra has been playing in that space. How do you think the investors are now looking at things? Do you think they're ready to lean in a little more? Are they still holding back? Give me your sense.
I would tend to believe that today is going to give them a little bit more confidence to say, hey, look, we know there's a pathway here to ultimately watching either more carbon free, if you think about Tundra, or more development, that there's a lot more confidence, I think, coming out of today than there might have otherwise been. I mean, it's I would argue has been a little bit clunky. So even as I think about, North Dakota today and us trying to figure out as a state, what do we do with data centers? What do we do with new development? What do we do with gas pipes? What do we do with all the components that might be an element of what we're talking about here? It's been a little bit clunky. It's not this everyone united within the state to say, hey, we're going to make a common push towards how do we get this stuff in. As you well know, we have bills in the legislature about data centers already and whether or not we should regulate them more or regulate them less. We have provisions in counties where we're prohibiting, my
moratoriums
on whether or not we develop out those facilities. Clearly, we've had challenges. What do you do with linear infrastructure in the state in the last little bit? Pipelines, whether or not they're carbon or not carbon, challenges to even transmission lines that we wouldn't have seen historically in the last little bit in counties who are putting provisions around setbacks that would make it impossible for all intents and purposes to get a power line through that county under those setbacks. So the idea that we want to take advantage of all of it is also going to have to come with a set of discipline about how can we get through things like linear infrastructure, how can we build new power plants, how do we capture, in North Dakota at least, all that gas that people find distressed on the west side of the state, get it bundled up into a pipe and get it delivered to something that's useful.
How do we declunk the North Dakota process? If you choreographed seats around a table, I hear you saying legislature, obviously, executive branch, clearly, there's plenty of examples where they're business friendly and they're a few steps ahead without question, but also certainly challenges. You got cities, you got counties, who's all around that table?
Yeah, I think today, clearly the oil and gas guys, right? Because I think the next play, at least a portion of the next play, is going to come out of how do we use the Bakken better, right? Trap gas now, how do we continue to drill some more? How do we let that sector? I think you're going to have to get utility sector together to some extent, to the extent that you're going to try to have a common plan about how do you address it, which by itself is difficult, as you know. Only half the utilities in the state are regulated by the commission, so going to the commission and ask them to play a role probably isn't the appropriate way to do it. But I think it is. It's the executive branch, some portion of the legislative leadership, oil and gas, utility sector, and then fundamentally the
local
data center guys themselves.
Okay, yeah.
And then what do you do is there some representation from the locals?
You need real thought leaders in each of those counties and cities.
Can North Dakota counties help kind of shape for them what happens with respect to the counties? And I don't know that that's the case, right? You got such a diverse set of interests as it relates to what the counties are looking for.
But if you did that well, the seats at the table you mentioned towards the end there, the Metas, the Googles, the Microsofts, they're going to say, hey, we're at that table too because you guys are figuring this out, right? That's the magnet.
Yeah. For sure. So you think about, we always talk about North Dakota being open for business and have a business-friendly climate, and I think that's true. I think this last 6 to 8 months has demonstrated that we have, I think, pulled back in a couple of places on how business-friendly we are. But I think we have a climate, we have demonstrated historically that we can solve problems when we want to. So it's, I think, Scott, a function of we have to decide, is this a part of what we want to do to be able to grow? Because I get a sense every once in a while, at least from some of that feedback, that there's a little bit of what I would describe as, let's just put borders around North Dakota. We like it the way it is today. Let's not let pipes in. As you well know, we've had a challenge with in a number of places. Let's not take lines out. Let's not let development. I mean, even commentary I hear about, places where we have significant opportunity for economic enhancement, and people not as gung-ho you would think they should be.
Fascinating conversation. Glad you're here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks, Scott.